Hey, this is Editing Django. This is a bit different. This is a little down the way. So, there's not a lot of background visuals for this video, and that's because not a lot of footage of Bismarck does exist, or I just wasn't able to really find it because I used DuckDuckGo, and DuckDuckGo is very weird on what you can find. It's a little better than Google, though. Highly recommend as a search engine. But there are some visuals here and there while I'm talking. So, just like my other videos, images and text will be on screen here and there, depending on what I'm talking about, if you're interested. Good evening. Welcome to my new video. It's going to be a multi-part series, mainly because I think it's going to be new and exciting for me and other people. Plus, it'll just be easier than editing a 2-hour video, honestly. Today, I'll be talking about the Bismarck, and throughout the coming week or weeks when I upload, it'll be continuing the Bismarck. Beginning with the German Naval Treaty, they were told that they could not exceed 6 battleships, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. Germany would also have a ship displacement restriction put on them, as they now could not have any ship with a larger displacement of 10,000 tons, which wasn't a lot, but for the time, that's what they had to do. Any ships they had that were older than 20 years could be replaced, as they were constructed before the treaty was signed. If you're questioning why this was put on Germany, it was due to the Treaty of Versailles. And not just Germany would be getting these restrictions. Other major powers would also be signing their own. The United States and Japan, as well as the United Kingdom, Italy, and France, would also sign their own, being the Washington Naval Treaty. Under the Washington Naval Treaty, these major powers would limit their own displacement to 35,000 tons. They restricted their heavier guns as well, being that they could be no larger than 16-inch barrels. This would be held for a little bit, and a lot of ships would come to use them by 1940, and Japan would not hold to this, being the Yamato. Going ahead without much detail, Italy would quickly start to build more ships and heavier ones in response of the French Navy, who was also building bigger ships, which easily raised the tension between the major powers who signed the Washington Naval Treaty. And in the year of 1935, on the 16th of March, Adolf Hitler would reject the Treaty of Versailles restrictions. His way of rejection was by expanding the military once again, creating the German Air Force, which would be the Luftwaffe, and finally pushing the expansion out onto the Navy, which would also be renamed the Kriegsmarine. The other major powers did see this happening, and condemned Hitler for his actions. Aside from this, they just let him off without much of a slap on the wrist. Instead of a slap on the wrist or anything major, Hitler and his ambassadors, as well as the British ambassadors, would go into talks within Britain. Hitler would come out victorious, as Hitler and the British would sign the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, which lifted the restrictions put on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. Now, Germany could almost build 35% of what the British Navy was, and up to 45% more submarines than before. This lift now allows 35,000-ton battleships to be built by Germany, which is where the Bismarck story begins. Only 5 months later, the battleship F, Ersatz Hanover, would be commissioned. The notable company of Blom and Voss would be given the order to build the ship. A sister ship to the battleship F would also be commissioned and given to the Kriegsmarine Werft shipyard. The sister ship would be battleship G, Ersatz Schleswig-Holstein. These names may sound unfamiliar, but later they would be redesignated to Bismarck and Tirpitz. Within the months of December 1935 and March 1936, the major powers would once again meet to discuss the Washington Naval Treaty. Japan would subsequently withdraw from their side of the treaty, as their civilian government ambassador would sign on these new terms. The Japanese military would see this. They didn't like it. They didn't want it to happen because now they're restricted. So they took it into their own hands and overthrew the government, becoming the fascist state of Japan that we know in World War II. An escalator clause would be introduced, allowing ships up to 45,000 tons to be built between all major nations in case a non-treaty nation were to be making larger and more powerful ships, which Italy was, and so Japan was as well. They were starting to. And because Italy and Japan did not formally sign the naval treaty, all the major allied nations would accept the 45,000-ton limitation and put it forward as the new limit. This 45,000-ton would also be accepted and put in place for Germany as well, between a new talk between Germany and Britain, though this will play a bit of a feature later. Bismarck and Tirpitz were more or less upgraded and better versions of their previous counterparts. Bismarck looked like an upsized Scharnhorst, and it did not help the fact that Tirpitz and Bismarck both would have the same features as their predecessors, though the wrench in the machine here is that Germany officially listed Bismarck as a 35,000-ton ship, when in reality, he was 41,700 tons. This is a far cry from what they'd listed, though it was not that bad of a figure since the new escalator clause was just being put into place, allowing 45,000-ton ships. The only issue with that is the fact that it would be put in place in 1938, leaving Bismarck to still be over the displacement set forward. Without much of a shock, the other major powers would also go over the 35,000-ton limit themselves. The ships that were over the limit after the 1936 treaty were the Vittorio Veneto, the Richelieu, King George V, and North Carolina. The stability of the Bismarck class was a priority, and a lot of care went into making sure it would be as stable as possible when at sea. So it was given a 36-meter wide beam. At the time, the Bismarck class was a true hulk, as it could easily take on damage and be completely fine for such, though as time went on, during his sinking, he would more or less just be a normal battleship. The ship had an armored scheme in which 70% of its hull was armored citadel, and an armored citadel is an armored box enclosing the machinery and magazine spaces formed by the armor deck, the waterline belt, and the transverse bulkheads. The Scharnhorst and Bismarck class would share the same lower belt armor thickness of 320 millimeters, and the lower belt was backed by a secondary armor belt that was 110 to 120 millimeters sloping to give it a better fighting chance at closer range combat, which that detail would actually help Bismarck quite heavily during its last stand. The uppermost armor belt was increased to 145 millimeters and given no portholes, though the torpedo belt would also see change in the fact that it would be increased to 5.4 meters off of the main amidship hull, while the rest of the armor would not be increased or decreased from the Scharnhorst. The weaponry on Bismarck would consist of the 38-centimeter SK-C-34 cannons, which were higher velocity compared to the guns that were a possibility for the Bismarck, the 40.6 centimeters. The 38 centimeter was chosen for the fact they were higher velocity and numerous for the Reich, while the Reich did not have 40.6 centimeter guns on hand during the construction of Bismarck and Tirpitz. The secondary weaponry would share similarity with Scharnhorst, using 10.5 centimeter guns or 105 millimeter guns. The only difference between the secondaries of Bismarck and Scharnhorst is that Scharnhorst would use single 10.5 centimeter guns on the amidship, while Bismarck would use a twin setup of 105 millimeter guns instead. On the screen is the list of differences and similarities between the two ships. Quite a bit is different, but the major differences being that of the displacement, armament, and crew size and armor. Now, this video might be a little shorter than what I've done before, but I think it's a good step in the right direction, and I thank you for listening and watching as far as you have. I will be recording and uploading the second section soon, as I want to try and do this in a multi-part series again, instead of doing an hour-long video. I might do a video on Tirpitz at some point, as its history goes a lot longer than just Bismarck's, though Tirpitz did not have more rich battles that Bismarck had. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.